A new Gallup poll shows that only 54% of Americans currently drink alcohol on some sort of a regular basis. That's the lowest share on record. It's led by sharp declines among younger adults in particular. At the same time, American distillers are facing mounting pressure abroad as tariff clashes and Canadian boycotts threaten their exports. Joining us right now to talk about all of this is Joe Magliocco. He is the president of Michter's Distillery and its parent company, Chatham Imports. And Joe, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
All right, let's talk through these big issues. Maybe we start with tariffs and boycotts, where those things stand, because that's where we left the conversation with you the last time we talked about these things. What are you seeing right now, particularly with tariffs? Maybe things are in a slightly better position if we reach some sort of 0-0 import tariffs.
Yeah, tariffs have had much less of an effect than I would have expected, and I think a lot of the industry anticipated. We're actually having a great year. Michter's exports are up actually 14% for the first half of 25. Now, that's unusual. The big problem for a lot of producers basically is Canada. And, you use the word boycott. It really isn't a boycott. It's not a consumer boycott in Canada. It's a ban. It's a governmental ban in 8 of the provinces, including, really populous, really big ones like Quebec, like British Columbia, like Ontario. So 8 provinces banned American alcohol or moved it from the shelves. Things are changing a little bit up there. 2 of the provinces, Alberta and Saskatchewan, are now open to having American liquor sales, but that's going to be with a 25% tariff, which is pretty hefty. For example, in Saskatchewan, a bottle of our entry-level US1 bourbon, Michter's US1 bourbon, is going to go from $108 to $133. That's a $25 Canadian increase all at once. So I can't imagine that's not going to affect volume. But Canada's been the big problem. And the Distilled Spirits Council has estimated that American shipments to Canada are down 62% this year. But the big thing about tariffs is what's exempt. And there are millions and millions of cases of tequila and millions of cases of Canadian whiskey coming into the U.S. that are exempt because of the USMCA. And that's been a real benefit to the industry.
So good news, bad news, how do numbers stack up, let's say, from a year ago and 2 years ago?
Well, I mean, in terms of spirit sales in general, Wine Spirits Wholesalers of America has something called SIP Source, and it's really good data because it's based on actual sales, and it's a good thing to look at. And spirit sales in the U.S. are actually down 6% for the first half of 2025. So that's a substantial decline. I don't think that the business is as challenging and as difficult as it looks right now. There are a lot of different issues. You have tariffs, but also, too, I think marijuana is a really big issue. At least at this point, Bloomberg Intelligence in December came out with a survey that really surprised me. And according to the survey, of 18 to 24-year-olds who use alcohol, 74% of them substituted marijuana for alcohol within the past week, which I think was kind of shocking. Now, depending on how a survey is conducted and the way the questions are answered, or asked, you could get very different results. But that being said, I think it really shows a trend. But I think long term, as society, as marijuana usage becomes more open and more legalized in the U.S., and as society adjusts to it and sees how it works, I think that marijuana, which now is a new kid on the block, is going to lose a bit of its luster.
Okay, well, that's actually a really interesting point, because I had been thinking of this as a more healthy alternative, the idea that maybe people weren't drinking as much because they were either using GLP-1s and so they weren't drinking, or because a lot of younger people just don't think alcohol is healthy, don't think it's part of their healthy lifestyle. But what you're suggesting is they're just substituting, one way to get high with another.
Well, again, I don't know this for it to be fact, but I think that that is definitely a factor. Look, GLP-1s actually work in favor of the spirit companies with high-end brands. because we do notice that as people are consuming, maybe one cocktail instead of two, because in a GLP-1, they're drinking stuff that's more expensive and better. So that in some ways, it's actually good for the industry. But as far as, Gen Z goes, IWSR, had a survey and they published something recently. And, I think for a 2-year period ending March of 2025, the percentage of Gen Z alcoholic beverage consumers, the percentage of Gen Z consumers who had consumed alcoholic beverages increased from 46% to 70%. That's that's a 2-year period. So Gen Z people are in fact drinking alcohol. And, Charles Passy is a brilliant writer. He's written for years for the Wall Street Journal and for Market Watch. And there's a really interesting article in Market Watch about, the challenges to the alcoholic beverage industry and about trends. And he ultimately concludes that what's going on right now is more likely a temporary blip than a cultural change.
Joe, just the idea that spirit sales are down 6% in the United States, the idea that Canadian imports are down by more than 60%, is that reflective of your own profit margins, or are you able to make up for it in other ways?
We're sort of an anomaly. We're very fortunate in that our brands are doing well. As I said, our Michter sales are actually up overall 6% this year for the first half of the year. So that's the 12-point differential versus the industry. We're lucky in that our brands are doing well. Our exports, as I said, were up 14%. So, there still is opportunity for companies with good brands. And I think another thing that you're going to see a lot in our industry, and it started now in whiskey and it's starting in tequila and mezcal as well, is a shakeout. There was a tremendous amount of venture capital money and a tremendous amount of private equity money coming into doing distilleries and tequila brands and mezcal brands. And, a shakeout is happening. Right now in Kentucky, LMD Holdings has taken their distillery into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Garrett County, distillery, which is reported to be a $250 million project, is in receivership now. So I think this shakeout overall is going to happen, and I think it's going to benefit the companies with good brands.